Everyone thinks they know who the hardest person to deal with on Sister Wives is, the man who yells, storms off set, and refuses questions. But what if I told you the real challenge isn't the loudest voice in the room, but the quietest? Because the host of the tell-all just revealed something that completely changes how we see this family. And once you hear who she says was the hardest to interview, you'll never watch these episodes the same way again. Stay with me, because what comes next explains everything. Everyone thought they already knew who the most difficult person in the Sister Wives family would be to interview. The man known for raising his voice, walking off camera, and refusing to answer questions. The patriarch who openly complained about tell-all episodes and called them exhausting and pointless. But that assumption was quietly shattered when Sukanya Krishnan, the journalist who has hosted the reunion since 2022, revealed something that stunned longtime viewers. She said the hardest person to interview was not the man who explodes on camera, but Meri Brown, the first wife, the woman who rarely raises her voice, the woman who sits calmly and chooses every word carefully. And that revelation alone forces a new way of seeing everything. Because difficulty does not always come from anger. Sometimes it comes from silence. Sometimes it comes from someone who has learned that speaking freely can cost everything. And when Meri first entered plural marriage, she believed she was building something sacred. She was young, devoted, deeply in love, and committed to a faith that promised eternal unity. But what she slowly discovered was a life built on emotional distance and quiet rejection. Year after year, she watched her place in the family shrink, not through dramatic fights, but through neglect and indifference. She remained married while feeling alone. She stayed loyal while affection disappeared. And when a person endures that kind of emotional absence for decades, they do not become explosive. They become guarded. And every time Meri sits down in front of cameras, she is not simply answering questions. She is navigating memories of humiliation, abandonment, and blame. Because her marriage did not fall apart suddenly. It dissolved slowly through silence. And when her husband eventually admitted on national television that he no longer loved her and had not for years, it confirmed what she had already lived privately. And imagine carrying that knowledge while being asked to speak openly about your life. Imagine being expected to relive pain that was never properly acknowledged. And that is why Meri learned to protect herself early. She learned that honesty was not always rewarded, and that vulnerability often became ammunition. And this lesson became permanent after the catfishing scandal, when, during a period of deep loneliness, she believed she had finally found someone who cared, only to discover it was manipulation that ended with her private pain broadcast to the world. And from that moment forward, Meri learned that opening up could destroy you, and so she closed herself off. Not from life, but from exposure. And this is the version Sukanya Krishnan encountered, someone polite, composed, but emotionally armored. And journalists are trained to pull stories forward, to access feelings, to invite honesty. But Meri does not offer access easily, not because she is cold, but because she remembers what access once cost her. And as seasons passed, something subtle changed. She was no longer trying to repair a broken marriage. She was no longer waiting for affection that would never return. She was staying because leaving felt impossible, until one day it no longer did. And when she finally walked away from the marriage, she did not walk away loudly, she walked away quietly, with boundaries instead of bitterness. And this made her even harder to interview, because anger is easy to provoke, but calm certainty is not. And when discussions turned toward shared property and financial decisions, Meri once again found herself in familiar territory, being pressured to comply, being asked to agree without full clarity. And when confidentiality clauses appeared, asking her to remain silent, she refused, not dramatically, not angrily, but firmly, saying she would not be silenced again. And those words carried the weight of decades, because silence had been demanded of her repeatedly throughout her marriage. Silence when she was hurting, silence when she was dismissed, silence when her pain made others uncomfortable. And now she was being asked once more to stay quiet without explanation. And this time, she said no. And that moment revealed exactly why interviews with Meri are so complex, because she will engage, but she will not surrender control. She will answer, but she will not expose herself recklessly. And every response is measured, every pause intentional, every statement filtered through years of lived experience. And this frustrates those who want raw emotion instantly, but Meri does not perform pain. She has already survived it. And when viewers watch closely, they begin noticing small details, the pauses, the deep breaths, the careful phrasing, because she knows how words can be edited, how narratives are shaped, and how quickly truth can be distorted, and she refuses to let that happen again. And that awareness makes her powerful and intimidating, not through volume, but through precision. And Sukanya Krishnan admitted that there were layers to Meri that took time to reach, because trust does not come easily when it has been broken repeatedly. And what makes this story gripping is that Meri is not withholding to punish anyone. She is protecting herself because she learned that survival sometimes means restraint. And that is why even when she opens up more in later seasons, there is always a sense that she is giving you only what she chooses. And that choice is everything, because for years she had none. And now, finally, she does. And that is what makes her presence so compelling, because viewers sense there is more beneath the surface, always more waiting. And that tension keeps people watching, because every time Meri speaks, you lean in, wondering if this is the moment she will finally say everything. And even when she does not, the silence itself tells a story. And that is only the beginning of why she remains the hardest interview in the entire family. As the season continues, the tension surrounding Meri grows, not because she is loud, but because she is controlled. And control unsettles people who are used to emotional chaos. And when Sukanya Krishnan sits across from her, she is not facing resistance, she is facing intention, because Meri listens carefully, processes fully, and then responds in a way that cannot easily be twisted. And this makes interviews feel slower, heavier, more deliberate. And that deliberateness is what keeps viewers watching, because every word feels chosen, and behind each answer is a history of being misunderstood and blamed. And when conversations turn toward trust and betrayal, Meri does not accuse recklessly, she simply describes what she sensed and later confirmed. And that quiet certainty carries more impact than shouting ever could, because instinct, validated after years of doubt, is powerful. And throughout the family dynamic, Meri had long been labeled difficult, cold, or unwilling to cooperate. Yet time reveals she was cautious for a reason, because decisions were being discussed without her knowledge, plans were being formed that excluded her, and conversations happened in rooms she was not invited into. And when those truths finally surfaced, it became clear that her guardedness was not paranoia, but awareness. And still, she did not respond with chaos. She responded with boundaries. And boundaries often anger those who benefited from your silence. And this is why some narratives turned against her, because it is easier to label someone difficult than to admit they were right. And even as those realizations unfold, Meri does not seek revenge, she seeks resolution on her terms. And that distinction matters, because revenge reacts while resolution decides. And Meri is no longer reacting, she is deciding. And when her closest friend sits beside her during the tell-all, something subtle but meaningful changes, because for the first time, she is not alone in the room. And safety alters the nervous system. It allows breath to slow and shoulders to lower, and while Meri remains composed, the presence of support gives voice to emotions she had long kept internal. And yet she still does not lose control. She allows others to express outrage while she remains steady. And that contrast is striking, because it shows growth without collapse and strength without aggression. And viewers sense that something fundamental has shifted. She is no longer negotiating her worth. She is asserting it quietly. And when discussions arise about loyalty and partnership, Meri does not rewrite history to protect anyone. She simply stops protecting what harmed her. and that silence is louder than defense ever was. And the interviewer senses this shift as well, because questions that once met walls now meet clarity, not emotional overflow, but truth delivered calmly. And that calm is earned, not forced, because calm after chaos is wisdom, and Meri has lived enough chaos to recognize what no longer deserves access to her energy. And as fans watch, they begin to understand that her story was never about bitterness, it was about endurance. And endurance changes a person. It teaches them what matters and what does not, and what deserves protection and what no longer does. And this understanding reframes everything, from her past actions to her present restraint. And suddenly, moments that once seemed distant feel intentional, and moments once interpreted as cold now feel protective. And this is why she remains the most complex figure in the family, not because she creates drama, but because she contains it. And containment requires strength and discipline and self-awareness. And when someone has spent decades having their feelings dismissed, learning to regulate emotion becomes survival. And that survival now appears on screen as composure. And while others express frustration through volume, Meri expresses it through boundaries and refusal and measured honesty. And this makes interviews unpredictable because emotional volatility follows patterns, but emotional control does not. And journalists thrive on predictable reactions, but Meri refuses predictability. She answers honestly without giving spectacle, and that confuses those waiting for confrontation because they never quite get it. And that becomes the loop that keeps audiences watching, wondering when the breaking point will come, unaware that the breaking already happened long ago, and what they are seeing now is the aftermath, a woman rebuilding herself, piece by piece, and choosing which parts of her life belong to the public and which remain her own. And that decision alone is revolutionary in a space built on exposure. And as the season edges forward, the audience begins to realize something quietly powerful. Meri is not afraid anymore, and fearlessness does not always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to bend. And that refusal is what changes the tone of every scene, because she no longer seeks approval, she no longer seeks reconciliation, she seeks peace. And peace does not argue, it decides. And when Meri decides a chapter is closed, she does not reopen it for debate. And that is why she will always be the hardest interview, because she is not performing, she is protecting. And there is nothing more difficult to penetrate than someone who knows exactly who they are and what they will no longer tolerate. And that is the truth slowly unfolding on screen, not through shock, but through steadiness. And that steadiness is the most powerful transformation of all. And maybe that's the real reason Meri Brown is the hardest interview. Not because she refuses to speak, but because she finally understands her worth after decades of being ignored, silenced, and blamed. She doesn't need to explain herself anymore. She chooses when to talk and when to protect her peace. And that kind of strength doesn't shout. It stands quietly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.